We're live. Hello, folks. Welcome to this edition of Nrwl Connect Live with none other than the Ben Lesh. Ben Lesh, do you want to say hello?
Hello. How are you?
That was perfect. So Ben, as everyone tuning in should know, is the what would you call? You're the maintainer, someone who's loosely affiliated with RxJS, I guess is.
I'm the lead on the project
Okay.
of the core team. Maybe not the smartest person on the team, but
I wasn't going to say it, but yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So welcome. Thank you for agreeing to do this with us. So we also have Zach DeRose from Nrwl.
Hey,
Zach.
No speaking. Okay, there he's going to speak.
yeah. No, I grabbed Ben for just a second and was like, "Hey, Ben, we want to get you on our Nrwl Connect Live next time when we were at Las Vegas for RxJS Live. That was a real cool conference. So
it was great
for coming.
Yeah. So Zach used the in-person pressure to get a commitment on the spot to join us on this live broadcast.
Hold on. He's got a picture of you on the wall behind him. Is that to like full facial recognition or something? Like
yeah, that's actually mandatory. Everyone at Nrwl has that.
Yeah. Mine's not framed yet. Everyone else's is.
Yeah.
I think Victor's is just off camera.
Whose is Victor's? David Bowie or something?
It is David Bowie, and over there it's Nick Cave.
Yeah.
Find.
Can you just put a beard on it?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can. Yeah.
And then of course Victor Safkin.
Hi everyone.
Victor, your audio cut out just then. Did anyone else hear it?
Quit picking on poor Victor about his audio.
Okay.
I'm used to it.
I honestly, okay, so here's the real deal is we were talking about this beforehand, and I think that Jeff might be gaslighting Victor on his audio. That's what I think.
Maybe. Our clients can attest to it because every client call we're on, Victor has to spend 2 minutes.
Oh no, it's going to get worse. You're going to be sitting in front at a desk in front of a client physically and be like, Victor, your mic's cutting out. Like you're gonna have him so trained that you'll be like, Victor, your mic's cutting out. He'll start talking louder.
Trolling keeps the relationship interesting.
Yeah, that's exactly. It's my strategy. I use it in my marriage as well.
Mm-hmm. But enough about our shenanigans. We want to talk about observables, if I'm pronouncing that correctly.
Observables. Yeah.
Observables. Okay. So I think we're all pretty big fans of RxJS at this point, especially folks in the Angular community. We grew up in it with the latest version, Angular 2+. But it was a life-changing thing for me, like to really get observables and see like the power of how you could compose applications with it. And I think it was either you. I think you were probably the one who introduced it to us on the Angular team at the time, and you were at Netflix at the time, and it was a different version of RxJS at that time. So, but then you ended up taking on the task of rewriting it as what was released as RxJS 5 initially. Yeah. How did that go about? Like, so there was an existing RxJS. Matt Pawłowski was the main person working on that. Had done a great job bringing it to market, so to speak, however you say that in open source.
Sure, yeah.
But where did you come in?
Well, the original history of RxJS is that Matt Pawłowski had it for like 5 or 6 years before I even heard of it, honestly. And the logo even is actually from Microsoft Project Volta, which was this project where they were trying to compile C# to JavaScript as like a build target. And so they needed a compilation target for Rx.net because Microsoft used a lot of Rx.net and wanted to be able to build to something. So they made RxJS. So there was like a straight port. And so when Matt had it, there were things in it called like current thread scheduler, which obviously makes very little sense in JavaScript, and other, kind of strange things that were just straight ports from .NET. I came in that I had a couple contributions to the original library. One of them was retry when, which is something we needed for like WebSocket reconnection at Netflix for the tool I was working on. And then
you're working on something that's pretty visualization heavy, right? Like
it's like real-time streaming visualizations. And the win for us with Rx, the reason I started using it was we had a little bit of it in there anyways because it was a good primitive for streaming, but we weren't using it a lot. What we were doing, this app was if you can imagine having, this is actually what I work on something very similar at Citadel. If you can imagine having multiple data visualizations, like maybe 6 or 7 to maybe even 20 graphs on a single web page, and it's all being updated in real time, like once every few seconds. You get this big bundle of data in, and then you have to scrub it down to just X and Y coordinates that then get charted. And what the problems that we were having was that we were pulling it out, and we'd have this big wad of JSON, and then you've got to parse it, and then you've got to, take this array, and then you map it and filter it and reduce it and map it and filter it, reduce it multiple times, and you end up with all these intermediary arrays, and they get garbage collected, and the JSON gets garbage collected, and all these other things. So garbage collection was slowly, like, you'd run this app, and like 5 minutes later, it would just slowly start to chunk and grind to a halt, and it was just garbage collection that was killing it. And so my first solution was to move everything to a worker. This is like 5 years ago, and people were like, really, you can do that? And I'm like, yeah, then all the garbage collection's over there. So, and that actually worked decently, and it's still a pretty good practice if you're doing heavy things to put things in a worker. But eventually I realized that, hey, if we used Rx to do this, then it works more like a transducer, in that it won't create all these intermediary arrays. And so that was kind of the first like gateway into doing it. And then I realized, well, wait, I can get the WebSocket to reconnect if someone walks between buildings and they lose Wi-Fi or anything like that. And then I started really getting into it. And I had a couple contributions. And eventually Jafar Hussain, who was on the TC39 for Netflix and was championing the observable proposal, and Ben Christensen, who was one of the original authors of RxJava, who worked actually like down for me a little ways on this, in the same org, but in backend stuff. And Eric Meyer, who created Rx, all showed up at my desk one day, and they're like, hey, we need to talk to you. And I'm like, okay. So I went out, and they asked me if I would be interested in rewriting Rx, and I straight up told them that I was not qualified, and that, there's a bunch of other people that are more qualified, like Paul Taylor or somebody like that. And they had seen my contributions. They had seen that I was pretty good at optimizations. And one of the goals they had around Rx with this rewrite was to not only just make it look like the proposal, but make it a bit faster as far as its runtime, like CPU performance. So those are the two things I set out to do.
So they had already gone to Paul, and he had said, no, I'm not stupid. I'm not going to rewrite this. They had asked, Jaffer was definitely not going to do it. Eric was
sort of. I think
hey, this guy, we can trick into taking this on.
This guy looks kind of dopey. No, I think that they saw a lot in my ability to explain RxJS to other people, and so
yeah,
they thought that by getting me more involved, and I got a lot of help early on from Paul and from Jaffer. Like, no joke. Like, a lot of the architecture came from Paul. Realistically, the approach to building it came from me. So like, we wrote performance tests first before we wrote any code, and then we wrote.
I helped with that. Remember?
Yeah, you did actually.
I think that's one thing I want to make clear is that my contributions early on were a lot more meaningful than Victor's. Wouldn't you agree?
that's totally true, I think.
Okay, thank you.
But no, it's the contributions that you folks had were around getting bench press in there, which actually I just recently removed that because it flat out stopped working. We were so behind on bench press.
Yeah,
and the tests were behind too.
Yeah, I'm with
but we need to get something like that added back in there soon.
All right, I'll help. I can see where you're going with this. I'll jump in, Ben.
Yeah, hold on just a second. I just realized that it's getting very dark in here. The clouds are up or something. Hold on, I'm going to turn my lights on.
Okay. Any comments about Ben while he's stepped away?
Well,
okay.
I thought he was in prison at first.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
it looks a little more brighter.
Yeah, it's bright. What's really funny is this space is also going to be my art studio. So
nice.
Yeah,
so
the light's normally very good,
you?
but it's just there's like a painting easel over there and some other stuff. But
yeah, I thought Austin's supposed to be sunny all the time.
It normally is, but these last few days, cold and rainy and yuck.
Yeah. Well,
But yeah,
Arizona
so
is usually pretty sunny.
back to where was I? We were talking about the beginnings of RxJS. It's at the end of the day, I was chosen. Told I told them specifically I wasn't qualified, and we ended up making it work. But yeah, we did it kind of performance first. We went through 5 or 6 different architectures and ended up in the one we were at. And at the time, if we had shipped it right there, it would have been RX3. But Matt needed to publish 2 more breaking changes, so that made it RxJS 5.
Yep. Yeah, this was so you'd done open source stuff before. I know you'd contributed to AngularJS and things like this, but those are the first thing that you'd actually started from scratch and led, right?
Yeah. This is I never. I mean, I'd run projects from scratch that were just me and not widely used, or things at workplaces or whatever. But
yeah, leading a rewrite of a popular project has got to be an interesting thing to do.
Yeah, the fortunate thing was we were able to have them in parallel, and part of that was just forced because Microsoft owned the other repository. But there was a long time where an older RX was just totally being used a lot more than the newer version. Angular, I think, popularized it, the newer version, the most. And then once the materials caught up and some of the ergonomics caught up and that sort of thing, I think the new library took off. But
over the in terms of like just leading an open source and starting an open source project from scratch, what are some of the surprising things of it, or things that you learned for other folks who are wanting to maybe go that path themselves?
I think that this most surprising thing kind of creeps up on you, which is it starts off and you're like, oh, this is a project, and you can kind of treat it like a pet project, and you can break things and do stuff or however you want, just like you could with any project at work, right? Like you can break things within reason, and everything's okay. And then eventually it gets to the point where the scale is insane and you have to slow down and be like, hold on. And then you're working with other people who are used to that, like a more normal project, like more normal projects. Like it's okay to have, I'm going to publish a major version every month, every other week, and have a breaking change, because people, they don't care as much. Or like, say it's like a web carousel or something. You publish a breaking change, a new version, that's probably fine for a lot of people. A lot of people just will never update it, and they've got their carousel and they're fine. But when you've got this infrastructural thing like Rx, where it's being used as part of other things in people's code and they want these changes, then you have to be really careful and measured and slow about breaking changes. So like, I feel like half the library is deprecated right now, because we're like, oh, well, we want to remove these things at some point to help make our stuff smaller and help make the library more manageable for people. But we can't. So that was the scale. The dealing with the scale problem is very, very surprising. And I know that the Angular team had to work on that, and they worked with me on that. I think Igor got frustrated with me a few times about it. Because I think he just forgets that not everyone's got like multiple years of dealing with massive scale. Use of whatever they're writing. So that's easily the most surprising thing. And then the other thing that's surprising is like finding out that there's people using it in corners of the world that you didn't even think about. And like a year into working on this, someone say, hey, check this out. There's a whole day of talks and different classes about RxJS in this classroom in Ghana. And so I was watching this YouTube video of people in Ghana in this little classroom talking about RxJS, and I followed all of them because I was so excited. I'm like, this is amazing. Because to me, it was the idea of working on something that people are using in another part of the world. Like, I'm a small town kid. That was pretty nuts. So that's another surprising thing about open source.
Yeah. So you mentioned it kind of being surprised how it spread and how it started, or didn't start, but Angular, focused a lot on RxJS, like APIs are based on it. The router was based heavily on it. The HTTP library, a lot of other things, forms. What are some of the interesting things you've seen beyond Angular? It's spreading to other frameworks, other communities, other uses.
Well, I mean, it's one of the interesting things is there's like Marble.js, which is using it as like a node server, kind of an express sort of thing, which is pretty cool. There are a lot of uses I've seen where people are using it to manage like connections on a node server. So they've got multiple WebSocket connections, and they're balancing those sorts of things. And then, of course, I've seen different things around animation libraries. There's a lot of use in React. React is such a big fractured community, right? So they've got like different people have different ways of doing things.
And you and Jay, didn't you work on Redux observable?
Yeah. It's in fact, if you try to navigate to like, I think it's like github.com/blesh, which isn't my username anymore, /rxducks middleware, like ducks as in quack quack. It forwards there because it's what we used to be called. But it's cool. It is basically the same thing as ngrx effects. I mean, there's no real discernible difference between the two. Little lighter, a little smaller, not as full featured.
Yeah, one of the cool things I've seen is in Svelte, which I haven't done much with, but I've seen they have first-class support for unwrapping observables inside of templates, which is pretty neat.
So that's as observables. So to disambiguate between observables and Rx, like Rx is a particular flavor of observable that's kind of the generally accepted flavor of observable, and then all of these operators and things around using them. So that's Rx, the library, and observable, the type, is something that it's super duper primitive, and a lot of times people end up like writing observables for their own library. So Relay, like Facebook's Relay, has an observable type in their library that's pretty much identical to RxJS's observable, only I think there's one or two more events. There's like a start event or something like that. Then Svelte has observables. They didn't call them observables, and I don't know if Rich knew that he was writing observables, but he needed a type that would that he could observe. He needed this reactive type for Svelte, and ended up writing basically observables into Svelte. And it just so happened that they were so similar in shape to what Rx could do that I think I added one line of code to Svelte to ensure that cleanup happened appropriately, and it would work with RxJS observables or any TC39 proposal shaped observable. So
yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's really neat, actually. They probably have the best support for Rx out of the box, which is funny considering that Angular actually like aimed at that, and then Svelte didn't aim at it and just accidentally had better support.
Yeah, a lot of people are surprised that when you bind observables to templates, you have to pipe it to the async pipe to actually unwrap it. Whereas in AngularJS, we had auto unwrapping of promises, which was cool, and we ended up removing it because of the problems it caused with two-way data binding. But now with the world moving towards one-way data binding and more unidirectional flow, it actually is kind of full circle that it makes sense now.
Yeah, I when I was on the Angular team, there was once or twice where I pitched that maybe they should just have it just work by default instead of having to use pipe async. It fell on, I wouldn't say deaf ears, but it
probably ended up low on the backlog.
It wasn't well received.
I'd say that's the case of. I'd like to see a lot more RxJS embracing in Angular APIs, but it's just always kind of been a lower priority to some of the other things happening.
Right.
So you talked about the initial motivation. Part of it was to align with the proposed TC39 spec, which I think it wasn't even at stage 0 at the time that you started it, and then like you used it as a proving ground for what would be in stage 0, so folks on TC39 could kind of see it in action and see that it actually works and those kind of things. How has that evolved, and where is it now in terms of standardizing as a spec for JavaScript?
Well,
even as a spec for in the browser.
It's forward momentum on that stuff in TC39 stalled about 2 years ago, where Jaffer, he was getting stonewalled a bit by committee members who mostly are no longer on the committee. And then also, he was just tied up with work that needed to be done at Netflix. So like he had to refocus himself a little bit. And now he's moved on. He's at Facebook. So working on GraphQL stuff. And as a side note, Jaffer was kind of the principal architect behind Falcor, which it's really unfortunate they didn't support the open source of that enough, because in my opinion, it's basically better GraphQL. Not to slam GraphQL, but at the time, there was stuff that it did, like streaming and stuff, that GraphQL didn't really do. So I'm hopeful that now that Jaffer's over there, that we start to see some of the other stuff. But
I really liked the JSON graph protocol that Valcor had. Like, there's the mental model of it was really simple.
Yeah, it was super interesting stuff, and it made a lot of use of Rx in the back end. So it's pretty interesting.
I've still got my hoodie, my Falcor hoodie that Jaffer gave me back in the day.
Yeah. I have a T-shirt. Oh, I think I shrunk out of that T-shirt actually, but
it'll be a collector's item someday.
Yeah, well, I have a few stickers probably, but anyway, so the TC39 stuff. Since he moved to Facebook, there's no champion, but it was never withdrawn. So I've been speaking with a few people on the TC39, and I was supposed to go speak this December about it and just give a presentation and propose. I have a straw man proposal for changing it a little bit, just to see how it lands, and to get feedback from the committee. But I'll probably end up going not this December, because December is a little too crazy. Probably end up going the next meeting to speak about it. And the idea is to try to kick this up again, because usage of observables has more than quintupled since the last time it was even proposed to. So just even if you just look at RxJS usage, it's really broadly used. The type is used in other spots that aren't RxJS, again, Svelte and other places. So.
But how big of a consideration is adoption for a spec? Isn't it more like, why does it need to be in the spec so does it make sense as a first-class primitive for?
Oh, I think it definitely has strong implications, right? Like if the community is consistently landing on recreating the same primitive over and over again, that's a strong indicator that maybe something like that should be in the language.
And wasn't there? I think I heard you mention at one point that W3C was considering standardizing as a browser.
So the Wetwig. So Wetwig. While I was at Google, I talked with Dominic Denicola, and he was like, "Yeah, I think that the Chrome team is very interested in making event targets. So anything that has an add event listener, remove event listener, that type, making that more ergonomic. Because right now you have to hold on to a function reference, in order to unregister. And so there was a proposal that I put forward on the Wetwig. I think it was like number 544 or something like that. But and the Chrome team was interested, but the deal is with Wetwig, 2 implementers have to be interested. And the catch with that is all browser teams are super busy. So the real way to get a browser team interested is if you can get somebody to implement it for them. So I don't know, I think now
what would be really cool is if you got WebKit to implement it, because that just
yeah. Well, so one thing, and I haven't had a chance to kick this back. Like whenever Brad Green was running the Angular team,
also he was absorbed by Facebook. All the great people are
also absorbed by Facebook. Yeah, he was big on getting an external contractor to help the Chrome team implement it in Chromium, but that predates Edge using Chromium. So it might be that if Google is still willing to do that, to get it into Chrome, that since that also covers Edge would be more interested.
All right, Google, if you're listening, you need to do it.
Right. Yeah, you should. So, but that would be great. So then we would have an observable primitive, at least in the browser. And then, of course, that puts a little bit of pressure on the Node community to see if they want to add it there as well. It would have to be a little different there because, as you know, event handling is a little bit different in Node. But yeah, I think that there's still some promise there. But the hardest thing is finding time to push these things forward, right? Like especially if I don't want to be the only one doing it. So
Why not?
well, kids and work and stuff.
Yeah.
I'm a Cub Scout leader these days.
Oh, so
it's big,
just when
important
you're
work.
out camping, just take your laptop
Yeah.
and
Try not to cut yourselves, boys.
yeah, exactly.
Don't play in the fire.
Well, they'll never learn if they don't cut themselves a few times, right?
Right. Yeah,
That's how I raise my kids.
That's what first aid kits are for.
Exactly. So Victor and Zach, if you want to interrupt me at any point, please feel free to. I see you've both muted yourselves.
You're doing a great job.
See, probably for the best, because I can barely hear Victor now. You hear that?
Yeah.
Hear how quiet it is? There it is.
Yeah, exactly. And now you're wondering why I don't want to interrupt. Okay.
Maybe that's part of my plan of always criticizing your volume. It's just to get you to talk less.
I think it's gaslighting. Be careful. Victor.
Yeah.
There's probably if he's gaslighting you about your microphone, there's probably other stuff too.
Yeah, I'm very suspicious. I have a diary where I write down everything that Jeff does to me and see if I can see the patterns. For me, the main thing that I wanted to just throw in there for adding official support for observables isn't even that you can subscribe to an event stream or whatever, but the tooling, the dev tools will have support for observables, and I think that's the main thing where the only thing, not the one, but the main thing in RxJS where it kind of lacks comparing to say support for promises, where debugging works, everything works. I want the same, but for observables, right?
Yeah, it's debugging. It's true. Like anything like that. In fact, I wish that there was ways to build something out, and I have no idea how this would even work, but build something out just with Chrome dev tooling or some sort of something on performance, the performance object that you could actually hook in. So anyone that was developing any asynchronous type could provide better tooling for their users, but it's probably a pie in the sky idea because there would be runtime performance implications to doing stuff like that. And it's better if it's built into the core, and then they can optimize it. But
because that's the main not a complaint, but the main thing I hear, which is negative about Rx. Everyone likes the way to compose streams, express coordination in a very declarative way. All this stuff is fantastic.
Yeah.
When it doesn't really work, you're okay, so how do I step through it? And you basically don't, right? You have to modify the code, add a bunch of tabs, listen to things, right?
Yeah.
And being able to just visualize it, show some sort of stream and see values flowing through, would have been while you're developing your app.
Yeah.
It's so cool. Maybe someone who is very clever can do it as I don't know, summer of code project or something. I don't know.
So there is a tool out there that Nicholas Jameson, who's an RxJS core team member, wrote called RxJS Spy or RxJS Spy Dev Tools, which he presented at RxJS Live, and it's a set of pretty powerful dev tools that people might want to check out. I can send you a link after, but
what's that called again?
RxJS Spy.
It's a Chrome extension.
Yeah, there's DevTools Chrome extensions. So.
Cool. All right, you heard it here, folks. Check that out. I'm gonna check it out. I haven't heard of it.
Yeah.
And again, he's a core team member, so it tends to stay in sync pretty tight. I'd like to get to the point where those sorts of tools are all in one repository, so we can make sure they all work together, so nothing gets out of sync. But we're not quite there yet. We're a skeleton crew. We're not a company full of full-time employees working on it. So
that's the best projects, because then you have to really focus on what's important to work on, and
you have to tell people no a lot.
Yeah, exactly. So you just get the highest value stuff that's gone through the gauntlet of people complaining of not wanting to work on it. So it's eventually you give up and say, okay, we have to do this.
Right.
In addition to Nicholas's tool, I think Hannah presented something that maybe wasn't as far along, but it was more visual, where Victor was describing, where you could actually see the streams of the data and see how they connected.
That's Hannah Howard?
That's Hannah Howard. That's correct. At Tech Girl Wonder, if you're following her on Twitter.
Cool.
Yeah,
so,
she's awesome.
So is that something that maybe isn't published yet, or is it something folks could try?
I don't know if it's published. I think that it is. I don't know. You should get her on the show though. She's awesome.
All right, cool. Yeah, I've follow her on Twitter, and would love to chat. Yeah, I guess you can look at her Twitter to see if she's published anything about it. Excuse me. You said it's at Tech Girl Wonder.
Yep.
Cool. So I'm curious because I was a little bit out of the loop as the pipeable API was agreed on, but I knew it, like I was there early when it was a problem, and we, like the first solution, I say we as if I had anything to do with it. I observed the early process of the patching operators, like the auto patching operators, where TypeScript actually had to modify the TypeScript compiler to be able to recognize reopening types and adding to the prototype of something that had already been parsed. So how did that evolve from where it was and then to the eventual API of, .pipe and passing in a list of functions?
Sure. So the main problem we were trying to solve with the patching operators and pipe is we were trying to solve the problem where if you have an observable and you have all of these methods on it, there's no way for a bundler to know how to tree shake those methods off. We didn't want to just have like a class with a whole bunch of methods on the prototype. Rather, we wanted to be able. Originally, we thought, well, what if we just patch these things? So that was the thing where you had like import RxJS add operator map, import RxJS add operator filter. So there's a few problems with that method. Is one, you're still decorating the prototype. So if somebody else had added their own map method, you could trample it. You also had this thing where you had like 20 imports at the top of something, or people would have like an RxJS util file or something somewhere that did all of it for them in one spot. And then the other thing is, like, there was no way to know that, oh, I've added this operator, but I'm no longer using it anywhere. So you end up with dead code anyways. And then one of the worst things about it was you could, let's just say that you had an API from your library that returned an observable. If you added a bunch of operators to your observable that you needed to use, those operators are going to be on the observable that was returned. And someone consuming your observable in their library or their app or whatever they're doing could end up depending on it being there. And then you remove it because you no longer use it, and then you break them downstream. There's no way for you to know that you've done that. So there was a lot of strange issues with that. So
we had so many clients who were asking us, okay, what is the best practice for this? Where should we put these? How can we make sure that we're not having these zombie operators still patching when we don't need them? And it was just like, okay, here are a few ways you could do it, and no way is really that great. So it's what's the least likely way to hurt yourself?
Right. So the probably the only real major contribution I've had to the development of Rx, other than like just generally working on it, the only invention that I've added to this is the pipeable operators. And so the idea was literally just to take the exact same operator that you would normally put on the prototype and pull it off. And instead of making it something that worked off of this, just make it part of a higher order function that passed, that basically took all the arguments and then returned a function that took an observable and returned a new observable. So because all an operator is it's something that takes an observable and returns a new observable. So basically kind of made them all into these higher order functions, and then added a pipe method to observable, which is just a functional pipe that works off of this, which is the observable instance. And you're able to kind of chain them together in that way. So the advantages to this there's several. The first thing is you have to import the operators that you want to use into whatever module you're using them in. So you'll know if you're not using it. You know that you're only bringing in the things that you're actually using.
Your IDE will give you those nice squigglies saying unused import.
Right. So you have that. The other thing is you can now use like a functional pipe to combine multiple operators together into a single operator. If you want to make your own custom operator, now you just build a function. You don't have to patch anything onto the prototype or anything like that. So you can do it. There's a lot of advantages to code organization with this. You can instead of having like before, you would have some observable dot map dot filter dot merge map dot switch map or whatever, and you just to look at it and read it, you wouldn't necessarily know what they did. But now you can say some observable transform to user type, fetch data from whatever. You can name your operators certain things and use them in pipe, and all of a sudden your chains become a bit more readable. So that's another big advantage. The downside to it is for TypeScript users, typing these things is not something that TypeScript was particularly good at. It's getting better. It's still not perfect. I don't know if it'll ever be perfect.
Actually, TypeScript Enterprise Edition works really well for it. So if you buy a license from Daniel Rosenwasser, then you'll get much better typing.
Don't believe him.
Send him money directly.
All the other suckers on the stream, he totally had me going the first time.
No, everybody go to Daniel Rosenwasser on Twitter and ask him how to get a TypeScript Enterprise Edition license.
Very good. Yeah, it's right up there with the JavaScript Enterprise Edition.
Mm-hmm.
It's got all the features you want.
JSEE.
So the other thing that's interesting about the pipeable operators is there is a pipeline operator proposal for JavaScript that is basically, it's like a bar, pipe, and a greater than, and it will just work with that particular operator. And if we get that, then it'll actually solve a lot of problems for TypeScript users too, because it will be easier for them to infer a type through something like an operator like that, because you're just doing it one at a time than having to do like a chain.
Is that one of the reasons why the pipe API took a while to bring out? Because it's pretty simple. I mean, don't want to oversimplify it, but the API itself is conceptually simple. Was it that it seemed like this thing was coming to the spec, which would have been, you still get the left to right expression and
I mean,
patch prototype.
So at the early on, there was a thing called the bind operator, which enabled you to basically make methods for classes and then just have them stand alone. And instead of having to patch a prototype, you do : and then some instance : whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And that one would have worked really well with the patch operators, because you wouldn't have to patch them anymore. You just pull them in directly and use them. But that proposal stalled, and I think that the pipeline proposal is more it's more generally useful than the other one. It doesn't have to. You don't have to use this keyword, which honestly is. I don't think anyone in this chat right here finds it confusing, but I do know that beginners and even mid-level developers find this confusing from time to time, especially with arrow functions and all these other things.
I don't know how it works. I just ask Victor anytime I have to type this and tell him to explain it to me again.
Right. Well, there's all sorts of implications too. So like if you have the bind operator, that : thing, so it's basically saying anything on the left-hand side of : take that and use it as this and the function on the right-hand side. Mm-hmm. What if that function is an arrow function? Now what do you do? Like, so there's all sorts of weird nuance to that. And then they were trying to figure out how can we lock this down? Like, what if you don't want people being able to use it with, like, it should work with number but not with string, for example, or something like that. Like, how do you lock down your functions you're writing? So there's cool precedents with like the extension methods and stuff in like .NET, but that's all done at build time, and at runtime I think it's a lot trickier. So. Mm-hmm. But yeah, anyway, so that whole thing didn't really work out. And the pipeline operator, it kind of came out either a little after we did pipe for RxJS or around the same time. And it's just serendipity that it would work really well together.
Somebody on the committee said, hey, look at this new RxJS API. What if we did something to support that? So
I wish.
It's a chicken and egg thing, right?
I doubt anyone at CC39 is looking at Rx for guidance for anything.
Gotcha. So what were the other names other than pipe? At one point, they were called lettable operators. What were
Yeah,
there?
yeah.
Was it always planned to be called .pipe, or what were the what could it have been?
Let's see. What were the others? I think that there was not do. There was another one. So let existed before. A let was an older operator that basically took the same sort of operators that it took a function that took an observable and returned an observable. That was what let did.
Mm-hmm.
But it only took one argument. So I think that we talked about just changing lets. What else? There was pipe. There was, I think, just op was another one, or like OP or OPS or something like that.
Nice.
Operators was proposed, but eventually we just ended up with pipe. There was chain. That was another one.
Oh, that would be cooler.
Yeah.
I like pipe.
Yeah, you can't say put this in your chain and smoke it though.
Yeah.
That is like pipe opens it up to lots of jokes like that, right?
Yeah, right.
That's an
Sure
important consideration when naming APIs is what kind of, like when we named our company, it's like, okay, Nrwl, you can do lots of fun things with Nrwl. You
Yeah.
get swag really easily, you make a cool logo.
Yeah.
So
There are lots of jokes about chains as well, just not very appropriate jokes, right? So it's harder to joke about them at work.
yeah. I think we've got some great questions folks have asked in the chat here. I'll pick Ward Bells first because I think it's one that a lot of people want to know. Oh, I can see everybody tensing up as an issue.
I'm
Ward,
always
you're famous. You're infamous, Ward. We all love Ward and his fancy suits. But he wanted to know how to hide all the. I'll quote him directly because I want to. Okay, do you have a way of hiding the RxJS crapola from the stack trace?
You can black box it. I mean, that still works.
Yeah.
Even in a bundle, you should be able to just go in and right click it and black box.
So does anything? So, but that'll just black box entirely RxJS. Not all like the. I like you. It'll do all the scheduler things that happen and all the try subscribes and things like that. But maybe there are some bits that you'll black box that would be helpful to see. But that's the only solution. So,
right now, that's the main solution. There's
so black box the script in Chrome.
So the architecture that I've proposed, one of the architectures, one that we've kind of landed on for RxJS 8, will shorten the call stacks quite substantially. So instead of seeing like next underscore next underscore next for like 3 or 4 calls from Rx for each operator, there should only be one call from Rx for each operator. So that should wean that down a lot. However, you're still always going to have that, and the only real way to just have it kind of hidden from view is to black box.
Yeah, and that works fine with source maps too, right? So even if you've bundled, then the source maps will black box. Yep. Okay, cool. Well, Ward, I don't know if that's the answer you're looking for, but that's all we got today.
I mean, if you can't in like an Angular build, then that's something they've got to manage. But
can you black box methods or functions in Chrome DevTools? That would be
just individual functions.
Yeah, because I could just go to like try. What is it? Try or unsubscribe or try on. I don't know, something.
Yeah, I know
some
what you
internal
mean.
method. But if you could just say, okay, I don't care about this. But show me everything else. I'm going to make a dev tool that does that and make $1 million. Okay, let's see. We've got some other ones. Here's one for Laurent Delamar at VMware. He said, how to know which. So operators. There's so many operators. They all do such interesting things. How, with so many choices and so many things that can be done, and operators already having been written by other people. How do you figure out the right operator for the job, or the right combination of operators for the job?
Well, that's kind of almost two tricky questions. So if you're looking for an operator to do a specific thing, there is like a kind of a choose your own adventure tool on the RxJS website. So rxjs.dev. You go run the side, and it'll ask you a series of questions, and then you end up at an operator. So that's one way to do it. Realistically, I think sometimes people attack the problem from the wrong direction. So sometimes if you're trying to build out something totally reactive, it's really good to start with what you want the finished product to look like, and then be like, okay, so this thing that I have, what inputs do I have that make this? So is there like, which pieces of data are coming into this view or this feed or whatever that need to show? And then you create literally just a simple observable of that thing, and then zip it or merge it, or combine latest, whatever you're going to do to get it to produce that output. And then you move up the chain and say, okay, so this name or whatever I was getting before, where does that come from? Instead of using of, let's produce it in some other way. And so you just kind of continuously work your way backwards, and you end up solving the problem better that way, in my opinion.
Good advice for tackling any problem, really. Start from the goal, start from where you want to be, and then work your way back.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I think so. The choose your own adventure. That's in the official docs, right? What's the URL for?
Let's see.
I just did the URL in the live chat there. So
you did. That's good.
Yep. I use it all the time. I like it.
What is it? I'm saying it for
sure. Folks. It's rxjs.dev/operator-decision-tree.
So if you go to rxjs.dev, I think it's in the left navigation.
Yep.
And so since it's like a single operation at a time, so you'll first want to think about how you're going to break down your chain, your pipe, as it were, and then use that to figure out what the best way is to do each transformation, and also look at which ones can do multiple transformations at once, like merge map, switch map, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Which is actually Brandon from our team, Brandon Roberts, Brandon Boilerplate Roberts, as folks in the Nrx community know him, or at least as I like to call him. He was asking which way to determine which of the flattening operators is best for a task.
That
it's
one,
like switch, exhaust, merge, concat, map.
There's only really 4 that people should worry about, and I would say most of the time they do not want merge map usually. So like the one I would default to, so there's only 2 that aren't lossy. So if you care about every single message, then you've weaned it down to 2, which is merge map and concat map. And merge map doesn't ensure any order, so it's just like whatever you get it. So like I think most of the time people should probably be reaching for concat map, because it ensures the order that things are subscribed to, and it's not lossy. But the other 2 are the lossy ones. So there's switch map and exhaust map, and they kind of do the opposite thing of each other. Switch map just says, as soon as I get a new value, map it to an observable, subscribe to it immediately, and get rid of the old one. And exhaust map says, hey, if I get a new value, map it to an observable and subscribe to it and cling on to it until it's exhausted of all values, no matter how many other values I get coming in, and just drop those. And then once this is done, then allow another one to come in. So it's...
I think with writes and reads, they tend to be different. So like with writes, I think merge makes more sense, because if you're writing something to an API or something, for example, then you probably do want those all to happen, and you may not care about the order. Whereas concat map, you still would get that with the order guaranteed. So Victor's ready to challenge what I'm saying.
Yeah, I don't want to go to,
which I'll welcome.
It depends on the size, like the aggregate that you're updating, right? Merge, like the order of requests sent by merge map may not be the order in which it sort of receives your requests. So the concat map basically says you cannot have any race conditions because you limit concurrency to 1. Right? It's 1 request at a time. It's very hard to make it not work correctly with writes. So with merge map, you need to make, like, it requires effort, even though you may seem that they are unrelated. So it's just your clients and your backend can go out of sync if you do it naively, right? Which is anyway.
And then with reading, then switch or exhaust tend to make more sense because it's usually the user wants to see this thing. Oh, they don't care about that thing anymore. They care about this new thing. So abandon the old thing, bring in the new. Anyway, that's just Jeff's 2 cents.
Yeah, no, I actually wanted to say how how pipe operators helped us in when we work with folks, because it's so easy to compose them, right? And it's so easy to author your own. We authored a bunch of things like optimistic update, so that people don't have to worry about like which map should I use. You just use an optimistic update operator, provide a few things we require you to provide, and we'll figure out what makes sense, whatever. So it is surprising how rarely people write custom operators, where I think they should do it more frequently, right? Some core team at an enterprise should be able to provide like the higher level primitives because it's so easy. It's really just, a few lines of code, you compose it, it makes sense, you tested it out. Folks, for some reason, don't do it, so you see a lot of duplication. Like these three operators always come together. It's like, well, if they always come together in your particular case for some weird reason, maybe, make it one, right?
Right.
So, well, so Ben had a talk on composing custom operators at ngconf last year. I was actually hoping to ask a question about that because the sort of the operators that come standard. One of the things I love about pipeable operators is you can see very clearly this is what's happening in this pipe. And I wonder when you use part of my hesitation sometimes to use custom operators is one, I'm not sure if other people are going to get it. Like what's he doing there? And second, you kind of have to click through then to see what's actually happening in this pipe then. Whereas with sort of the out of the box operators, you can kind of expect people to know about those. And then you can see very declaratively, this is what's happening in the pipe. So I'm curious, Ben, if you have a preference either way. I think you were leaning very heavily towards custom operators in your talk, though.
Yeah, I think that the IDEs make it so easy to click through certain things that if you find yourself with an observable with a pipe and then like there's 8, 9, 10 operators in the pipe, it's the mega observable, right? It's no different. So one mind-bending thing for people is what they don't realize is that observables are just functions. So if you are piping operators, which are transforming observables into new observables, what you're really doing is you are using functions to build another function. So when you look at that, you're like, it's a giant function declaration is what it is. And we all know when you see a giant like mega function, unless it's something that's built to be highly optimized, you look at it and think, this is a bit of a smell. We should probably break these into smaller chunks that are dedicated to doing specific things. And it's really no different with operators now that we are able to do that. So I think that custom operators kind of solve that problem. Now I will say that if it's a really short and sweet bit, map filter, whatever, like that's probably fine. It makes it more readable to not have to jump all over the place. But if you find yourself doing things over and over again, make a custom operator. If you find yourself building this huge chunk of functionality, make a few custom operators and kind of break it up. So, people can understand the chunks, and you can test the chunks individually very easily because you have this function that you can be like, oh, I'm going to pass an observable of 2 into it and see what comes out the other end. As opposed to, maybe having to inject a bunch of subjects and pump things into them and then see what happens through this big chain of whatever. There's lots of different points of failure and other things you have to mock or test, where instead you've just got this individual, I'll test this batch, and so on. So it makes unit testing it a bit easier.
Yeah.
I want to point out that several people in the comments are commenting on Victor's microphone. So
you're all in cahoots. Okay, I know that you're all in cahoots.
Hans Schenker said, give Victor a better microphone. Very important.
Yeah.
Troy Combs said version 2 of a tin can has been released, which is better than your microphone.
I think Jeff's running the long gaslight on this one.
Yeah, it's that's fine. I accept it. This doesn't help me or doesn't make me buy a new microphone. In opposite, the more I hear, because I'm a contrarian.
I know
it's very hard for me to listen to people and do what they want. I tend to do the opposite. So I will have to call from some actually buy like a Canon speaking to that.
I know you will.
Just to be more difficult. I enjoy being difficult more than anything else.
Yeah.
All right,
So-
Jeff. Sorry, go ahead, Zach.
Well, there was a bit of a clamoring in the chat for a question by Deborah K. Do you want to ask that one?
Which question was it? You go for it.
I'll go for it. Yeah. So Deborah asks, what is the best way to better understand how the operators work within the context of a pipe? For example, I was surprised how start with appears to work within a pipeline. It appears to skip all the operators before it, but execute all of the operators after it.
Oh, so start with. I could see how people might think that. So
I've been confused by that before too.
yeah, so I mean, start with what it's really doing is it doesn't care about what's before it or after it. Like any given operator doesn't really, quote unquote, execute any operators before it. Like what it does is it just subscribes to the source. So everything above it in like if you have an observable, every single operator above it is returning a new observable. So the observable that was created by all the operators above wherever you have start with is the source coming in. And what start with really does is it takes the value and says make an observable of this value and concatenate it to so do concat observable of that value and then the source. So that's all it's really doing. So the thing that people are surprised by is like, oh, I had a take until or something before it and then a start with, or like, I don't know, I had a map before a start with or after a start with, and you'll see like the behavior might change slightly depending on where the start with is. But really what you're doing is you're saying everything, the observable that was created by everything above start with, make that observable start with this value. And then everything after, yeah. So it's a semantic thing. That one of the ways you can get around that is to actually separate your observable. So you would say, okay, create an observable and then end your pipe with start with, and then start another observable right below it and say, that one, the previous one you made, dot pipe, and then the rest of them afterwards. And it might make it a little bit more readable for folks, but I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it made sense to me, Ben. All right, we've just got a couple minutes left. We'll give this time to Ben. So how can folks, what's exciting coming down the pipe with RxJS, no pun intended, and what's the best way for folks to up their RxJS game?
So the big stuff that's coming down the pipe right now is we've already got RxJS 7 in alpha. It's really stable. What a lot of people don't know is Google is using RxJS 7 alpha right now in production. So it could be a beta if we wanted it to be, I suppose. But the RxJS 7 is all about trying to get the typings correct with TypeScript. So it's been updated to TypeScript 7, trying to get type inference to work a lot better. The breaking changes in it are going to be around types. So things like if you're explicitly putting generics on operators, that some of those areas might break. But you're probably doing that because you weren't getting proper type inference before. So the fix for it is usually to just remove where you were explicitly putting generics, and things will just work again. So that's coming out, and then once that's out, the entirety of our existence during version 7 will be releasing minor updates that will have code transformations built into like ESLint rules, TSLint, ESLint rules to help people transform their code away from deprecated APIs. And then once all of that's done, we're going to start releasing RxJS 8. So because RxJS 8 will remove a lot of those deprecated APIs, and it is a fresh rewrite of RxJS to be much, much smaller bundle size, to the tune of I think with a base Angular release, it was like if you just did like Angular CLI new or whatever, it was about 40% to 50% the original size. Cool. With what I had tested. So it'll be a lot smaller. It's just as fast, and the call stacks are shorter. So that's all real exciting.
Word Bell, shorter call stacks.
Yeah, so So that's really exciting. I'm super pumped about that, but we have to be measured and slow about how we do this. So we make people's migration path as easy as possible. One thing that's showing up in version 7 already is we're trying to kind of separate scheduling from certain things that don't really require scheduling. It's hard to get into explanations about it, but schedulers are used for two things. One is to get like a timestamp, and the other one is to actually schedule something to happen later. And almost every operator that uses a scheduler uses it for one or the other, not both. Replay subject was also using observe on internally with a scheduler, and we were able to take that out. So what that means is people that aren't using schedulers in RxJS 7 won't be paying the cost for schedulers anymore. So before, it would end up getting bundled with your output bundle, even if you weren't really using it, weren't really using them. So like the idea of trying to remove some of that extra stuff from people's bundles is one of the ways that we're going to start getting things smaller. And then, of course, the smaller rewrite down the road, which could be a ways off, because again, nobody's working on this full time, so it's totally unpaid work, and we have to do it on a volunteer basis.
All right. Are you looking for more volunteers?
Always. Right now, it's kind of boring work, though. So I don't think a lot of people. But the hard work that
the boring work is the best. You get famous for doing nothing.
Yeah. Well, the exciting stuff that's going to happen in version 7 has a little to do with work in the actual library and more to do with working on tooling around the library to do things like those code transformations for TypeScript users, which will be a big deal.
I didn't know ESLint had support for doing transformations.
Well, TSLint does, but TSLint is being folded into ESLint. So
I see.
That was, and when we went from 5 to 6, we
Shout
had
out to James Henry out there.
We went to 5 to 6. Minko made some TSLint rules that transformed people's imports from RxJS and transformed their operator use from the dot chains stuff that were patched into the pipeable operators. So there's precedent for it. It worked really, really well for the people that knew that it existed. So we're going to try to do the same thing. So that way, when people are stomping fuss, oh, we can't update to RxJS 8 because it's too hard. We'll just point them to say, here, if you just use this, it will transform most of your code for you. And you'll have to do some cleanup, but that should be it.
Cool. All right. Well, we're a little bit over our time, but this has been great, great discussion, and great to catch up with you, Ben. So thank you for joining us. Also, thanks to my colleagues, Zach DeRose and Victor Safkin. Despite the microphone issues, I see you smirking because I'm going to say something about your microphone.
I was waiting. I was like, I will be quiet just to. It's just so hard to remain quiet.
So thank you, Ben and folks, and thanks everyone for tuning in and for all the great questions and the conversation. And we'll see you next time. Tweet at Ben with all your questions that didn't get answered.
Right, sure.
Or tweet at us. We'll try to help as well if we know the answers. All right. Thanks everyone.
All right. Thank you very much, guys.
And